As mandated by federal copyright law, any form of unauthorized recording or photography is strictly prohibited. There will be no intermission. Thank you. We hope you enjoy the event.
Greetings all, and thank you for attending my lecture recital, Max Richter, Post-Minimalist and Soundtrack Pioneer. My name is Jake Hicks, and I'm giving this recital as my capstone project for my degree in music. Playing with me today will be Natalie Doughty on piano, and on the horn, Ethan Boswell, Cheyenne Bragg, Ken Hicks, and Will Rapp. I've had a particular interest in soundtrack music all my life, and that love for the music, starting all the way back with Star Trek Voyager when I was a kid, has motivated me to be where I am today. Max Richter's compositions have been paired with numerous shows and movies that I hold dear to me, and I thought that it would be nice to talk about and play some of them today. Since most of his compositions are composed for solo violin and piano, I have taken the liberty of arranging these for the horn so that I could play them for you today. To start us off, I would like to play a piece for you entitled Embers from Richter's 2002 album, Memory House. Before we get into the finer details of his works, I'd like to tell you about the man himself. Max Richter was born in West Germany. Max Richter was born on March 22nd, 1966 in West Germany, but grew up in Bedford in the UK. He went to the Mander College of Further Education and then proceeded to the University of Edinburgh and the Royal Academy of Music, where he studied composition and piano performance. After graduating, he went to study under the Italian composer Luciano Berio. Berio himself was a proponent of experimentation in music, and while he had a stronger flavor for classical music, he most certainly influenced Richter's way of composition. Richter is quoted as saying, quote, "My music was very, very complicated and kind of impenetrable. He basically just subverted all of my expectations and deflated a few of my grander ideas, and tried to lead me back to the origins of what it was I was trying to say." This idea is something we'll be seeing a lot of. As for how Richter's composition works, let's take a look at the piece you just heard. In my listening and practice, I found that what Richter said about finding the origins of what he is trying to say is the very essence of his music and of minimalist music as a whole. Here with Embers, we see a fine example of his composing style. Let's start with the piano. We can see that the running eighth notes alternate from E flat to D as a note on the beat every measure. This repeats for the entire piece. On the left hand, we can see that there are, at least for now, only whole notes descending every measure. They reset every 4 bars. Both the running eighth notes on the right hand and the whole notes on the left occur throughout the entire piece, forming its kind of skeleton. There will be, for the most part, a new idea every 4 bars. This starts with the dotted 8/16 we see in the next 4 bars. This will stay with us for most of the piece, but disappear on occasion when there are other parts he'd like to emphasize. For instance, when I enter just 4 bars later. There's a bit of back and forth with the parts introduced so far up until measure 21, when Richter adds a slow-moving part to the left hand of the piano. This subtly introduces and mirrors the horn part that will be introduced at 29. The horn part is relatively simple throughout the piece, but once it changes to become even simpler at the aforementioned 29, Richter uses this opportunity to introduce the eighth note part in the left hand of the piano. This shows a key trend in Richter's music and minimalist music in general: the emphasis on simplicity. There's generally only ever one part that has serious movement in this piece and in most of his other music. Looking at the parts above, they are generally uncomplicated and contribute to the minimalist goal of setting the venue for your emotions, as though they were a more musically intensive soundscape. I encourage all of you to listen for that in the rest of the pieces. To close Embers out, Richter added a slow-moving quarter note part in the piano's left hand. From here on, the piece loses elements until it returns to the original piano line from the beginning, concluding Embers. In a moment, we'll talk about his discography, starting with his solo works. Speaking of, this is Mercy from Richter's 2020 album, Voices. That was Mercy from Richter's 2020 album, Voices. And with that, I'd like to talk about Richter's works over the years. Not every single one is included, as he has been a busy man, but I've selected the ones that I believe either have been influential on the rest of his work, or are emblematic of his style, or are generally famous. First, his debut album, Memory House. Memory House came in 2002 and was about a mixture of themes and topics, ranging from the Kosovo War to childhood memories and poetry. Astonishingly, it was performed by the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra after having been selected by BBC Radio 3 for their Friday night late night junction program. The first piece I played, Embers, was from this album and was one of the first pieces of his that I'd heard and fallen in love with. The Blue Notebooks from 2004 is his most prominent solo work. On the Nature of Daylight, the second piece from this album, was my introduction to Richter via the movies Arrival and Shutter Island. A prominent feature of this album is that there are interludes between each piece with ambiance and Tilda Swinton reading poetry, connecting the album altogether as a whole. The underlying topics of this were protests of the Iraq War and themes of a troubled childhood. Later, I'll be playing Written on the Sky from this album. And another cool fact, I actually saw this performed live with my mom at the Kennedy Center by the American Contemporary Music Ensemble and Richter himself this spring. It was awesome. Infra, 2010, was an opera that Max Richter composed for, but after doing so, he decided to expand on his ideas in the form of an album. The opera, and by extension the album, were inspired by the 2005 terrorist bombings in London, further cementing that Richter has preferred his solo work's subject matters to be centered around social and geopolitical conflicts. Recomposed by Max Richter, Vivaldi, The Four Seasons. Vivaldi's The Four Seasons is a famous piece that many of our music-oriented people will have heard of, and Max Richter essentially did a cover of it in more of his own style, influenced by his teachings from Beria. If you find yourself interested in listening to Richter after this and are a fan of more Baroque classical music, I encourage you to take a listen. 2015's Sleep is a unique album that I think everyone here could find to be an easy listen, and it's only 8.5 hours long. Thankfully, it's intended to go along with a full night's rest. It uses only about 4 to 5 calming themes, all with their own subtle variations played throughout. It has been performed live 4 times in overnight concerts, with beds provided for the audience. If you prefer to sleep silently, but are still interested in listening to it, there's an abbreviated version that's about 1 hour, but maybe not while driving home from this. Voices came out in 2020 and featured an upside-down orchestra, which consisted of 12 basses, 24 cellos, 6 violas, 8 violins, and 1 singular harp. It was inspired by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in response to the modern, quote, post-truth politics. It even featured readings from the Declaration from various voices around the world, most notably old recordings from Eleanor Roosevelt. The music video for Mercy, which I just played, won a BAFTA award. Our next topic will be his famous soundtracks, and to kick that off, I'd like to play a piece for you entitled Rosalee Theme from the 2017 film Hostiles. The film, taking place in 1892, follows an army captain to his strong disapproval, escorting a Cheyenne chief dying of cancer to his home alongside his family. This is Richter's Rosalee Theme. The work that Richter has been made most famous for is not his solo works, though they are prominent. What's introduced most people to Richter has been his soundtracks in various movies and shows. There are far too many to list, but I'll note some important ones. Waltz with Bashir. An Israeli film from 2008, this animated movie follows the horrific experiences of the director during the 1982 Lebanon War. The film itself won a Golden Globe Award and was even nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. Richter's soundtrack was nominated for several awards, and he ended up winning the European Film Awards award for Best Composer. Shutter Island. In 2010, a trend with Richter's music began. Richter's On the Nature of Daylight was prominently featured in the film, but he did not compose a soundtrack as it was merely a compilation of works from various artists, such as John Cage, Georgie Ligeti, Gustav Mahler, and Ingram Marshall, just to name a few. This instance of using a piece of Richter's as a notable addition to a soundtrack was mild, but would continue especially in the future, especially with this piece. Similar to how Richter composed Infra for an opera and then expanded it into a complete album, he did the same thing for 2012's Disconnect with the piece we were just talking about, On the Nature of Daylight. The soundtrack here was heavy on ambience, but the four most significant pieces are On the Nature of Daylight and its three variations. The Swimmer, composed for the movie, Written on the Sky, a variation/reduction for piano from the Blue Notebooks, and Unwritten, a reduction of Written on the Sky into its more chordal structure. The Leftovers. Oh boy, we're going to do a deep dive on Richter's soundtrack composing with The Leftovers as what we'll be dissecting. For now, know that both this show and its soundtracks are masterpieces. You should all start it when you get home. I will say that these soundtracks, three seasons for reference, did help to bolster Richter's career in soundtrack composition and get him even more to the public eye. Now, 2016 is not the title of the movie, but it was an incredibly busy year for Richter. Nosedive. While I've yet to start it, Black Mirror is a show that many of us will recognize the name of and are currently having various reactions to based on what we've seen. At the peak of the series' popularity, the third season's premiere episode, Nosedive, was composed by Richter. Currently, the combined listens to the soundtrack on Spotify are about 25 million. Impressive for such a small score. Arrival. My favorite movie of all time, except maybe The Dark Knight. This is the movie that introduced me to Max Richter. Funny enough, though, he was not actually the composer for this movie's soundtrack either, a boundary-pushing masterpiece of its own composed by Johan Johansson. Richter's piece was the only non-experimental piece in the score, and both started and ended the film. Arrival ended up nominated for 8 Oscars, winning 1. Unfortunately, the soundtrack was actually rendered ineligible for any Academy Awards because of the prominent use of Richter's On the Nature of Daylight in the soundtrack. But it was critically acclaimed and introduced millions of people to Richter, such as myself. Taboo. Richter, on top of everything else this year, also composed the soundtrack for the show Taboo, starring Tom Hardy. And then bringing us to 2017, Richter composed the score to Hostiles, which I just played a piece from. Now, 2018 was also a busy year for Richter, and he somehow managed to compose amazing soundtracks to 3 movies and a season of television, which I'm going to rapid fire. White Boy Rick, Never Look Away, Mary Queen of Scots, and My Brilliant Friend. The best album of these, in my opinion, is My Brilliant Friend. Oh. Ad Astra, a sci-fi drama from 2019, Ad Astra received an incredibly mixed reception. The Richter score was a highlight to its general audience and reviewers alike. This did seem to mark the beginning of what seems to be a long break from film composing for Richter, as he's only since composed a movie soundtrack for 2024's Spaceman, a Netflix original which did not garner much in the way of viewership. A similar path was followed with his television scores as well. In 2021, Richter scored Apple TV's Invasion and continued scoring all 4 seasons of My Brilliant Friend up until its conclusion in 2024. For right now, it seems that Richter has been taking things relatively easy. Well, at least for him. And that concludes our not-so-brief overview of his soundtrack works. In a few moments, we'll talk about how soundtracks are composed, but before that, I'd like to play a piece for you entitled Miss Sloane's Solo from the 2016 movie Miss Sloane, a political thriller starring Jessica Chastain as a title character, who, a devious and cunning lobbyist willing to do anything to win, tries to take on her old bosses in the gun lobby all at once. Here is Miss Sloane's Solo. When we think of soundtracks for various media, we often have certain ones just pop into our head. Melodies we can instantly recognize. For some, it's Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Jaws, Jurassic Park, or some other movie probably composed by John Williams. For others, it's Hans Zimmer's Interstellar or Pirates of the Caribbean soundtracks, to name a few popular examples. This process for making these daunting soundtracks can vary wildly as well. For instance, John Williams, when working with Steven Spielberg, will be shown a rough cut of a movie before he starts composing. He'll take notes and mark down significant moments for the score, and then he'll begin by sitting at his piano and handwriting various ideas he has. This process can take weeks, and then he'll move on to arranging everything around those ideas. However, unlike Williams, many composers do not have access to cuts of the film or show that they are working on, often relying on scripts or discussions with the directors and writers about goals for the music. All of these methods of composition, especially in soundtracks, focus back to a concept from the Baroque era of music called the doctrine of affections. The idea, solidified in the 17th century, is that certain musical devices will elicit emotions in the listener. One early researcher into the subject, Johann Mattheson, cataloged a large quantity of these instances. Quote, joy is elicited by large intervals, sadness by small intervals. Theory may be aroused by a roughness of harmony coupled with a rapid melody. René Descartes held that there were six basic affects, which can be combined together into numerous intermediate forms. And these are as follows: admiration, love, hatred, desire, joy, and sorrow. One of these we're going to see a lot of in our next subject, Richter's work on the leftovers. The basic premise of this show is that on October 14th, 2011, the world experienced an event known as a sudden departure, where 2% of the world's population vanished out of thin air in an instant with no discernible explanation. The show takes place 3 years later in the fictional town of Mapleton, New York, and it follows its residents as they all continue on with life, coping in their lives in various unhealthy ways. For now, here is She Remembers. I gave examples earlier about how various composers do their soundtracks. Now let's talk about how our man of the hour did this fantastic score. To start, it's important to note how he was managed by the showrunner and executive producers in making the score, especially since this was actually his first time making a soundtrack for a TV show. Thankfully, he was the exact opposite of micromanaged and was basically told he could, quote, just do his thing, which Richter said added to the show's soundtrack being more like a solo work album rather than a score. He would receive scripts well in advance and actually decided to come onto the show after the pilot script was sent to him. He'd also get footage throughout shooting to help him understand the world and the characters. As for his actual composing process, there were 5 major ideas that went into crafting the Leftovers music. These were 1, a focus on small-scale, intimate music, 2, landscape-esque music, 3, religious influence, 4, decay, and 5, sculpting. For the small-scale, more intimate music, all there is to do is look at the show's main theme, The Departure, based on the piece of the Twins, Prague, from his 2002 album, Memory House. The Departure is the piece that both caps off the opening scene of and underlines the show. Here is a brief example. I say The Departure, but I should note that the excerpt you just heard is only one of 5 variations of that theme composed for the first season, and one of the 10 total composed for the entire show, and that's for only what's on the albums. These variations were recorded at his studio in Germany on the various pianos housed there, so that there'd be a different sound each time. Here's a snippet of another version entitled The Departure Home. Fun fact, this was actually the first piece I ever taught myself on the piano, a little under 5 years ago now. These variations and a few other different pieces provide an incredibly personal feeling when listening to and watching the show, exactly what Richter aimed to do. It can't all be cool piano themes though, and you have to have something to fill the gap and act on our affections like we talked about earlier, even if it's only there to provide background emphasis to the scene and actors. One example is that throughout the soundtrack, Richter creates chords that move incredibly slowly and swell in various parts of the orchestra based on the mood. And he refers to these in the titles as clouds. Let's take a quick listen to Dark Cloud for Kevin, our main character. Oh. These pieces serve to, as Richter puts it, improve upon silence while staying out of the way of what's happening on screen. For the religious influence, it was a wise decision to add onto the show. There's references here and there, such as the titles of the pieces Dona Nobis Pacem 1 and 2, translating to Grant us peace in reference to an old Christmas song from early 1500s, and is in the Agnus Dei section of the Latin Mass. Richter also makes use of organs and inflections from choir voices as parts of his music. This is important for the world of the Leftovers, as religion seemingly has a minimal place in the traditional sense, but is very present in undertones throughout the show as a possibility on everyone's mind about the sudden departure. Next, a key focus on his composition was decay. This was intended to go in tandem with the themes of the departure, with notes quietly disappearing in front of your ears. This is especially apparent with his choice to use the piano as the main instrument of the show, as its notes have a natural decay regardless of how you play them. We also heard this with the swells in the cloud piece. Everything always faded back into nothing, and that remains true for even the loudest pieces in the soundtrack. Dona Nobis Pacem 1 and 2, and deafeningly loud, but Richter keeps recording and lets the explosions we heard resonate and disappear into the void. Lastly, I'd like to briefly mention the idea of sculpting. This is essentially just making a large quantity of music and musical ideas, and then doing what Richter's mentor, Barrio, taught him, and paring it down to its most essential. All of these elements combined gave Richter the perfect framework for this renowned soundtrack and helped to give me the best television experience of my life. To conclude my dive into The Leftovers, I would like to play a piece for you entitled A Blessing, a variation of the Departure theme I showed you earlier, originally composed for a string quintet and now arranged for horns. Here is A Blessing. Thank you for coming today. This was a lot of work to pull off, and I'm happy to have been able to share it with you all. To close out this recital, I'd like to play a piece for you entitled Written on the Sky. It's from Richter's second album, The Blue Notebooks, and is a variation of On the Nature of Daylight, his most famous piece. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Thank you again. This is a wonderful experience. I'm happy to have had you all here. See you.